Today, we are talking about the Archon's secret plan to control humanity. And we're going to be answering the question, are Archons real? Are they real beings? And how this is actually happening now and what we can do to combat it. And not only that, not only were we talking about are the Archons real, we're exploring this in a banned Gnostic text, a once banned Gnostic text known as the Gospel of Philip. And there's so much more that we're going to explore as well, such as God's secret name. And this all connects. We have so much to talk about. Honestly, I was looking at this and it's like, wow, this could actually be 3 videos. There's that much info in it, but it all kind of connects together, and I want to be able to have it in one video. So this is going to be just jam-packed with information, and very important information having to do with what's affecting us right now. Like I said, we're going to see how this is playing out all around us right now with all this division and war, what's going on. That's what we're talking about. And we're in this war of the mind that we find ourselves in. So we're going to get started. Before we do, as always, please make sure that you hit like and subscribe. If you enjoy my work, support over on Patreon or hit join right below this video. Also, remember, my new book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind, is out right now. You can go find it on Amazon. Go check it out. Go get it and leave me an honest review. Tell me what you thought about it there. Let's see. Also, my podcast, Dawn of the New Earth, is on Spotify. Please go give me a follow there. Help spread this information around. It helps on that platform. And then finally, hey, remember, there are a lot of people and groups out there who don't like what I'm doing or what we're doing, and they're spreading a lot of misinformation and disinformation about me and our group. So just use logic and reason. Don't fall for the BS. And all this just further reinforces how important it is that we spread this information and change the world. All right, so let's talk about this banned gospel and the Archons, if they are real beings, and how we can see this plan unfolding right now and what we can do to combat it in this war of the mind, this war of the consciousness that we find ourselves in. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the Gospel of Philip. Now, you might know that the Gospel of Philip is one of the Gospels that inspired the Da Vinci Code. The Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene inspired the Da Vinci Code. Now, that, of course, is a work of fiction, but it was inspired by actual real documents. So the Gospel of Philip is actually the gospel where it describes Jesus kissing Mary. And that's where the speculation that Jesus had a wife comes from this. But this gospel is packed with so much more than that. That is just a small portion of what's discussed in that gospel. So let's take a look at this. We're going to open this up right now. Let me bring it up on screen. So here is, oh, why is it not on screen? It should be. Is it now? No, it's not. Let's see. There we go. Okay, it should be on screen. So, by the way, people are constantly asking me like, oh, where can you read this information? Where can you read it? And I say this at the beginning of all my videos. This info is free to read on gnosis.org. It's a great resource. It's a great website. You can read all these books that we talk about on my channel, almost all of them, when it comes to the Gnostic Gospels, over on gnosis.org. So go check it out. So this is the Gospel of Philip. And I'm going to tell you right away that there's a lot to get through because I want to get to this. And in the beginning, right, as we start this, you're probably going to be like, what does this have to do with Archons? What does this have to do with the secret plan to control humanity? But we have to know a bit about what reality is, what we are, and what existence is before we can understand the plan of the Archons. And so just, bear with me. And I'm going to have to go kind of fast through some sections, more so than I usually like to. I usually like to dissect it bit by bit and talk at length about each thing. But there's a lot of info here, and I want to be able to put it all in one video. So let's just get started, okay? Like I said, remember, it's going to be like, what does this have to do with anything? It'll make sense, and it'll all connect together at the end. So this starts off by saying, the slave seeks only to be free, but he does not acquire the estate of his master. But the son is not only a son, but lays claim to the inheritance of the father. Those who are their heirs, those who are heirs to the dead are themselves dead, and they inherit the dead. Those who are heirs to what is living are alive, and they are heirs to both what is living and the dead. The dead are heirs to nothing, for how can he who is dead inherit? If he who is dead inherits what is living, he will not die, but he who is dead will live even more. Okay, so what the heck is this talking about? What does this even mean? What this is telling us, first of all, starts off with the difference between a slave and a son. And it's saying that there's a big difference between being a slave and a son. And the thing that they're pointing out in this gospel is that a slave wants to be free, but a slave doesn't expect to inherit anything from his master, right? But the son, on the other hand, knows that he has a right to his father's inheritance. Now, I want to say real quick, remember, this is allegorical, okay? This doesn't reflect the actual idea of inheritance in the world as we know it. I'm not talking about actually passing down wealth, because that can actually be extremely negative. This is how the elite usually control the world, is by hoarding wealth and then passing it down through generation and generation. So I just want to be clear. This is not saying that that is a positive thing, that is a negative thing, but we're looking at this as in an allegorical way, in that a son expects to receive something from the father. Okay. So what does this mean? So this isn't like about physical inheritance. It's about understanding our true nature and our spiritual inheritance. Okay. So when it talks about being heirs, it says those who are heirs to the dead are themselves dead, and they inherit the dead. So this means that if you're tied to what's spiritually dead, like materialism, superficiality, ignorance, then you inherit nothing of true value. You are spiritually dead. So if you are dead, you will inherit the dead. If you are obsessed with dead material things, you're not going to inherit the spiritual. You're not going to realize your spiritual self. You're going to remain dead and inherit nothing but death. But those who are heirs to what are living, or heirs to what is living, are alive. That's what it says. Those who are heirs to what is living are alive. So this is about understanding your eternal nature. And remember, in the beginning, I said, you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with the secret plan of the archons? Well, first we have to understand the Gospel of Philip is laying out what we need to know about ourselves and existence before we can understand what the archons are trying to do. So this is about understanding your eternal nature, this idea of being alive and inheriting the living. So remember, the dead inherited the dead. So those who were obsessed with material things and superficiality inherits nothing spiritual. There's nothing wrong with material things, but if that's all you're obsessed with, you're not going to understand what you are, where you are, or why you are here. However, those who are alive, that is, those who are interested in understanding deeper things about themselves and reality, will inherit the living. They will understand when you realize that you're connected to the divine, that you are something eternal, you are spiritually alive, and you inherit everything that's actually valuable. Spiritual wisdom, understanding that you are an eternal being and a connection to the source of all existence. So the passage continues here, and it says, the dead are heirs to nothing, for who can inherit, what does it say? The dead are heirs to nothing, for how can who is dead inherit? So if he who is dead inherits what is living, he will not die, but he who is dead will live even more. So this is just, again, talking about spiritual death leading to nothingness. But if someone who is spiritually dead gains an understanding of truth, well, then they become more alive. They awaken to their true nature. So even though this is a little convoluted and confusing, ultimately, it's saying that it's about awakening to our eternal nature. It's about moving from a state of death, a state of spiritual death, to one of spiritual life, when we recognize and understand what we are, and we understand what is truly valuable, both in this life and beyond. Okay, so it's about moving beyond earthly material things and understanding our spiritual truth. So let's continue now, because I want to move through this kind of quick. Because we want to get to the important parts. So it says, a Gentile does not die, for he has never lived, in order that he may die. He who has believed in the truth has found life, and this one is in danger of dying, for he is alive. Since Christ came, the world has been created, the cities adorned, the dead carried out. When we were Hebrews, we were orphans and had only our mother, but when we became Christians, we had both father and mother. Okay, So this is continuing this idea about, death and life. And it's talking about how it says a Gentile does not die, for he has never lived in order that he may die. So this is basically saying that those who haven't found spiritual truth, those who are spiritually asleep, haven't really lived. They're basically saying, if you're not alive, you can't die because you've never lived to begin with. And so this is talking about people who are totally spiritually asleep. They're just really emphasizing that they're so dead that they can't even die because they've never been alive. It's just very emphatic about this situation. They haven't experienced spiritual life. They can't really die, and they remain in a state of dormancy. So this is different from where is it here? I'm always, when I highlight it here, I lose my place. So you don't care. What do you mean? Okay. So now we're talking about Christ coming. Okay. So it says, since Christ came, the world has been created, the cities adorned, and the dead carried out. So what is this talking about when it says, since Christ came? Well, this is about Christ's bringing, creation, beauty, order, where there was none before, but there's a deeper way to understand this. So when we're talking about when Christ came, we can, because what does Christ represent for the Gnostics? Christ represents an individual who is telling people about a new consciousness so they can understand their true selves. So the idea of Christ coming is really the idea of a new consciousness coming on the scene. Christ come, and that's why I say we are the second coming of Christ. Us, all of us together. Jesus isn't coming again down from the clouds. Christ represents a new consciousness, and we are that new consciousness that is trying to help humanity reach that state as well. So we have this idea of the coming of Christ being about the development of a new consciousness in humanity. And then it says, when we were Hebrews, we were orphans and had only our mother, but when we became Christians, we had both father and mother. So this is, again, talking about a shift from being spiritually incomplete to whole. It's talking about coming to a whole understanding of reality, meaning that before Christ came, only bits and pieces of existence were understood. Metaphorically, before the dawn of a new consciousness, the understanding of existence was incomplete. And so we can understand that now. So for individuals who haven't attained all awareness, that are just self-aware, they only have a limited understanding of existence. They don't understand they understand some things. And in this metaphor, they have a mother, but not yet a father, just representing incompleteness. They understand some things. They understand that they are individuals, and they understand themselves from an egoic perspective. They understand what they need to be able to communicate and get around, but they don't understand that we all exist together into an interconnected whole, and that we are all eternal beings. That understanding isn't there. And so the coming of Christ is the metaphorical representation of that understanding coming to humanity. Let's move a little faster because I want to get to the discussion on the archons. So those who sow in winter reap in summer. The winter is the world, the summer, the other eon, the eternal realm. So here they're calling the eon. Now this is a little confusing because in Gnosticism, eons are usually beings, but here we're using eon to refer to the eternal realm. So let us sow in the world that we may reap in the summer. Because of this, it is fitting for us not to pray in the winter. Summer follows winter, but if any man may reap in the winter, he will not actually reap, but only pluck out, since it will not provide a harvest for such a person. So this is about understanding that. So it says, those who sow in winter reap in summer. The winter is the world, and the summer is the other eon. But if any man reaps in winter, he will not actually reap, but only pluck out, since it will not provide a harvest. So if you plant something in wintertime, and then you wait till summer, It will transform into something that nourishes you. If you plant something in winter and try to harvest it in winter, you're just going to pull back out what you already put in. So essentially this idea of nurturing our true spiritual inner potential. And it takes time to be able to do this. Okay, so Christ came to ransom some. And after this paragraph here is where it starts to get to the very important issues. Not that this isn't important, it is. But I think a lot of us may understand this already. But if not, if you're new to the channel or new to this information, that's totally fine. Christ came to ransom some, to save others, to redeem others. He ransomed those who were strangers and made them his own. And he set his own apart, those he gave a pledge according to his plan. It was not only when he appeared that he voluntarily laid down his life, but he laid down his life from the very day the world came into being. Then he came first in order to take it, since it had been given as a pledge. It fell into the hands of robbers and was taken captive, but he saved it. He redeemed the good people in the world as well as the evil. So this last sentence is really what's important here. And this last sentence is going to lead in to the main discussion here. So it fell into the hands of robbers and was taken captive, but he saved it. He redeemed the good people in the world as well as the evil. So the world fell into the hands of robbers. And this is where we're going to start to talk about like the nefarious forces of existence. And so when it fell into the hands of robbers, it means that individuals who were there to rob you of what you really are, to distract you from your true nature, to take away from the truth of your existence for their own means. They were robbers. They stole the world. They stole you. They stole your essence. And Christ coming saved it by virtue of the fact of, remember, representing a new consciousness. The rise of a new consciousness is what will save the world from the robbers. And it says he redeemed the good people in the world as well as the evil. Eventually everyone's consciousness will raise. Now, this is not something that's going to occur in a singular lifetime. There are a lot of people out there who have very negative intentions and will probably take them many lifetimes to achieve a certain state of understanding. And then that's even complicated because you can reach higher levels of consciousness in a negative direction if you don't properly form certain structures in the psyche. But that being said, eventually everything will be one. So now let's continue. It says, this is critical here. Light and darkness, light and darkness, life and death, right and left are brothers of one another. They are inseparable. Because of this, neither are the good good, nor evil evil, nor is life life, nor death death. For the reason each one will dissolve into its earliest origins, but those who are exalted above the world are indissoluble, eternal. Okay, so they're talking about all these different aspects, opposites, light and darkness, life and death, right and left, and saying that they are brothers of one another and that they are inseparable and neither good, good, nor evil, evil, etc., etc. So what's this talking about here? This means that opposites, like all these things they mentioned, light and darkness, life and death, these things are all interconnected and can't exist without each other. At least how it's being described here. They're basically saying life can't exist without death and right can't exist without left. So for example, imagine a world where there was only up and no down. That's impossible. You can't have a world where there's only up and no down, because up only makes sense in relation to down. Down is what gives meaning to up, and up is what gives meaning to down. You also can't have a world where there is only right. If you have right, you also have left. And this is incredibly important for understanding things, and a huge aspect of why so much distress and strife is in the world, because people see so many things as opposites, as being opposed to each other, when they are not opposed to each other. They are just opposite poles on a spectrum that requires each other for its definition. So it's not as clear cut as people think. It's not, but people like to put things in boxes, but it doesn't work like that. And it continues by saying that eventually everything is going to return to its original state, but those who transcend the material world, they're eternal and indestructible. So we have the understanding that we are eternal and that we are indestructible, and that there are robbers and nefarious beings involved that want to steal the world. So how are they going to do this? And this is going to get into sort of the plan here of the archons. It's going to start to get revealed. So it says, names given to the worldly are very deceptive. This is key. Here's now where we start to unravel this. Names given to the worldly are very deceptive, for they divert our thoughts from what is correct to what is incorrect. Thus, one who hears the word God does not perceive what is correct, but perceives what is incorrect. So also with the Father and quote unquote the Son and quote unquote the Holy Spirit and quote unquote and life. All these words, all these names. So all these words like God and Father and Son and Holy Spirit and life and light and resurrection and the church. Those who hear these words does not perceive what is correct, but perceives what is incorrect. People do not perceive what is correct, but what they perceive is incorrect unless they have come to know what is correct. The names which are heard in the world deceive. If they were in the eon, the eternal realm, they would at no time be used as names in the world, nor were they set among worldly things. They have an end in the eon. So what is going on here? What are they talking about? And this is critical. They're talking about the deceptive nature of names and words. Basically, they're saying everything is a lie. Everything. All the words are a lie because they do not accurately represent what existence is. Because what existence truly is exists in what they call the eon or the eternal realm, and what exists in the eon or the eternal realm cannot put into words. Words are just arbitrary labels that humans have created to try to signify or stand for certain concepts. But some concepts cannot be put into words. Some concepts are beyond the human language, because the human language, here's the thing about the human language, is that it cuts things up into pieces and puts things into boxes. Reality isn't like that. Reality is, so when we say, oh, there is a tree over there, well, there is this thing that we have given the label or the word tree. We give it the word tree and we label it tree. This is very helpful and necessary for getting around in the world and survival. You can say, hey, go to that tree and pick up an apple and pick me an apple. Or there is an enemy hiding in that tree over there. So we have all these words, all these concepts, apple, enemy, tree, all these labels that we have created and assigned to certain things. So it's very useful for not understanding. It's very useful, understanding to a certain degree, but it's very useful for practicality. But it's all a lie. That thing over there that we say tree isn't a tree. What it is, it's a vibrational structure that flows into everything and is not static and still, but is, hit my thing there, is constantly growing and transforming. It grows from a seed to a sprout to a small plant and eventually becomes a giant tree. And the philosopher Hegel, one of my favorite philosophers, says that if something is truly true, like eternally true, it shouldn't change. Truth shouldn't change. So for example, if you point to a certain thing, right? If you point to an object and go, that is a seed. Well, that seems like it might be true right now, but you come back to it in a week after you plant it, it's not a seed anymore, it's a sprout. What happened? If it's true, if something is true, it should, and Hegel gave this example of writing down the word, it is day. If you write down on paper, it is day, Hegel is essentially saying if that were really true, it shouldn't change. But what happens when it's nighttime comes, that thing that you wrote down is no longer true. And essentially the idea is for something to actually be true, it is eternal. And so I'm just giving some examples here to get you the idea of, we have labeled all these different things around us with words, and people misunderstand because unless you have fully explored the concept in ways that's just even beyond words, you're not going to truly understand what that word is trying to signify or communicate. So basically, they're saying, look, you have the word God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, life, light, resurrection, the church. And they're saying, when people hear these words, they don't know what is correct. They don't know. The only people who know what are right are those who already have an understanding of what existence is. Those who already have an understanding of what existence is can understand what these things truly mean. But those who don't start to get caught in a web of deceit and deception. And so the manipulation of words and symbols and words, is what plays into the manipulation tactics of the archons. Not only this, but this is how all secret societies manipulate consciousness as well, through words and symbols. And you might be thinking, well, what do you mean? Like, obviously they use words, but it's the conscious understanding of how to manipulate words and symbols to purposefully manipulate consciousness. See, it's one thing to just use words and naturally be caught up in their deceptive nature, but it's another to consciously realize, oh, and this is beyond just like lying, right? It's more than just lying. It's not like just, oh, I'm going to say something that's not true. Yeah, we all know we can do that. But rather, it's about understanding that one can manipulate consciousness by weaving together a net of words and symbols into a particular pattern that can completely and utterly transform a person's psyche, and not for the better. It can trap them and enslave them, which is exactly the role of the archons. So we have more here to talk about, and this is important, but let's pause for a minute and talk about the archons. Let me just highlight this because I always lose my place here. So let's talk about the archons for a minute and their influence. So this is all about manipulating the mind and controlling consciousness. We are right now in a war of consciousness, and the archons are masters at using names, labels, and symbols to deceive us. So first, the question is, right, like, are archons real? Are they real beings? We're going to answer that in a minute. But before we answer that, let's look at these tactics. All right, let's assume their existence for a minute and look at these tactics. So the archons know that by twisting the meaning of words, they can control how we think and perceive the world. Words like God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, light and life, they can all be used to mislead us. So think about, for example, how the church has used all these words to mislead us. And the cathars looked at the Catholic Church as being the servant of Satan. because according to them, right, what they called God wasn't God. It was Satan. So do you see the manipulation of words and labels? If you have a satanic being, evil being, which clearly the Bible is a evil being who has, in the stories, caused countless deaths of women and children, and the innocent accepts animal sacrifice, accepted a burnt virgin sacrifice, the most horrible things you can imagine. This is obviously one of the worst beings imaginable, but all you got to do is put the word God on it, which comes with a certain concept, attributes, and understanding like, oh, goodness and love and light. Slap that right onto Satan, and then you have people believing that Satan is God. Now, remember, these are concepts, okay? But these names are powerful. And when they are used in this way, they enslave our consciousness. So the archons are playing mind games, creating confusion, and keeping us in a low state of awareness. They want us to misunderstand terms, to keep us from realizing our true nature and potential. For example, the word God. Understood traditionally, what does it do? It keeps us from understanding our true nature and potential. Why? Because it literally rips our divinity away from us. When we understand God in the traditional, let's say, Christian view or any monotheistic view of an external deity, are we understanding our divinity? No, we are saying that being is divine, not me. I am a sinner. I need to worship that being. I need to please that being. And so that word and that concept has been misapplied and thus has trapped your consciousness into a low state of awareness by ripping your divinity away from you by misusing these words, concept, labels, and symbols. This is all a war of the mind, a war of symbols, a war of language. That's what this is. It all starts in the mind. All these wars that are being fought, all of these are because of ideas in the mind. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. Look what's going on in so many different parts of the world. Look what's going on in America. Why? Why? Because of these concepts like God, like in America, where people are trying to strip women of their rights and oppress the LGBTQ plus community. What's often used? What's often behind this? God. We have to be a Christian nation. This is what God wants. A lot of the things that are occurring in other parts of the world, I have to be careful about what I say on YouTube, but what is a lot, not all of it, but what is a lot of it rooted in? What God wants. These are all ideas. And this is why, they're like, oh, what do you mean words and symbols? They're not that powerful. They are the most powerful thing. They are more powerful than nuclear weapons because it is the symbols and words that will give rise to someone creating nuclear weapons and pushing the launch button. It is the words and the symbols that change and create and destroy all things. So this is something that we need to fight back against. How do we fight back against this? It's about elevating our consciousness and seeing through these illusions, understanding that all these names have been misapplied and that this is all a mind game. And the key to winning is becoming more aware, more enlightened and understanding of what existence is and connecting to our true selves. And not just individually, but collectively. We all have to break the chains of this web of this web of sleep and dreams, as Gustave Meyrink said, this web of sleep and dreams that humanity has fallen under the spell of. And by raising our consciousness, we can break free from this understanding and reclaim our power. But let's continue because there's a lot more to this. So we're talking about names and how names can be used for manipulation. And they're going to talk about a very important name, the name of God. And it says one single name is not uttered in the world. There is a name that is not spoken in the world. The name which the Father gave to the Son. It is the name above all things. The name of the Father. For the Son would not become the Father unless he wore the name of the Father. Those who have this name, meaning that it's not, notice, it's not just Jesus that has this name. anyone, those who have this name know it, but they do not speak it. But those who do not have it do not know it. So what are they talking about here? And this is a very powerful passage. And this is talking about the name that the Father gave Jesus Christ. And this is symbolic of Jesus Christ realizing that he is divine. It's saying that Jesus understood he was God because, and this is symbolically represented as the Father giving him his name, the name that is above all things. So this isn't about an actual word because it's something that cannot be spoken. It's an understanding. It's a realization of the divine nature. That's why it says the name which the Father gave to the Son. For the Son would not become the Father. The Son became the Father. The Son became God unless he wore the name of the Father, came to the understanding and the realization of his divine nature. So when we think about names, we usually think about labels and words, like I said, to identify things like tree. But in this context, this is more than a word here. This is a deep spiritual understanding. That's why they say it cannot be said. It cannot be uttered. It was Jesus fully embracing that he was one with God. It's not just, it's not just a knowing of a name. It's embodying this concept. So again, it doesn't just apply to Jesus. And remember, for those who might be new to this channel, I interpret all this stuff allegorically and metaphorically, and we're going to unpack all that when it comes to all these different things. I don't want you to think that I'm like, oh, we all need to become Christians. And no, I'm not talking about that. This is just one way that this idea was communicated. But anyway, I want to move on here because the important thing is you see that it's not just Jesus who has the name of the Father or is God, but anyone who has the name know it. And if they have the name, then they are God. And they so they have this name, they have this understanding, but they don't speak it because it's not something that you can say. It's a realization. They understand that they're connected to the divine and that they are God or a part of God or that we're all part of God. Now, of course, we can talk about it and try and communicate it, but you have to have this is the thing, you have to have a certain level of consciousness to understand it. I can go out there and say to someone, hey, you are divine, you are God. And they'll go, what the F are you talking about? I don't know. What do you mean? That sounds like, devil talk or whatever. But someone who has another level of consciousness and you go to them and you say, hey, you are God. They go, yeah, of course, obviously. So in order for someone to have the name of God, it's not something you can just tell them. They have to when they raise their consciousness, they take on the name of the Father and become the Father. So it's not something it's an inner knowing. So those who have the name are those who understand their true divine essence. And those who don't have this name, they can't understand it. They'll hear the words, they'll hear the names, but they don't truly know what it means on a deep level. It's something that can't be conveyed by speaking. And this is what I emphasize a lot, especially with my material when it really talks about the Neogenian system and my books that are about raising consciousness. One of the main points that I say is that, look, this is something that you have to do yourself, right? I can show you, I can help you, right? Now, I'm not saying, oh, I'm so great, I can help you, but I'm just giving you an example. If you want to know a certain thing, like how to reach higher, like what I tell people, right? People say, well, how do you reach higher consciousness? And I go, well, it's not easy. It's difficult. You have to understand concept networking, metacognition, phenomenological experience. And I can tell you all these things. I can tell you all these words. I can tell you what metacognition is, that it's thinking about thought. I can tell you about concept networking, that it's about taking things that seem disconnected and learning how to put them together to create a full, complete picture of reality. I can tell you about phenomenological experience that has to do with an inner experience of existence in different ways that one can have those inner experiences. I can tell you all that, and you can hear all those words, but if you don't actually do it, If you don't actually do it, nothing is going to happen. Just listening to these words isn't going to do anything. It can help spark things and kickstart things and be catalysts. That's what all my work is. My work is a catalyst. They're all catalysts. My videos, my books, they're catalysts to spark a new consciousness. And I can't do it for you. No one can do it for you. It's up to you to do it. You can't just hear the words. You have to discover it for yourself. So this idea here, and I really like, when you first read this stuff, it might be like, whoa, what are they talking about? When you really unpack it, it's very intelligent. It's about shifting our focus from the external to the internal. Right? Not about the words, but the internal understanding. That the true nature of the divine, the true meaning of God comes from within. And it's about recognizing and embracing our own divine nature like Jesus did, according to this particular gospel, who is using, and again, for those who might be new, I'm not like raising Jesus up on a pedestal or anything. We can learn from any archetypal symbol and many different people in history. I'm like, for example, I love the Carpocratians and the Marcionite Gnostics. They had, particularly the Marcionites, they would have an image of Jesus, a picture of Jesus next to a picture of like Plato and Pythagoras and a bunch of philosophers on equal ground. And they even believed that if they worked hard enough, they could become equal to Jesus or even surpass Jesus. So it's important to understand this is not like the Christian understanding of Jesus Christ. It depends on the interpretation. So having the name of God is about realizing that we are God. It's not something that we can say. So we're coming to these important ideas about names and words and the power of names and words and how they can be used to deceive, how an understanding is important to be able to know the true essence of these words and what these words represent. Because if I say the word God, a million people are going to have a million different things pop into their mind. That's why I really like to stay away from the word God. Because if I say God, everyone has some preconceived notion. You start thinking of the Christian God, some guy in the clouds with a beard, or any other depiction of God, depending on what religion you're from, or how you were raised, or what part of the world. So if I say the word God, automatically certain things come into your head. But if I say something like the word absolute, you're like, oh, what is that? What's the absolute? And then we can talk about the true nature of the thing. We're still using words, so we can't get to it in an exact way. But we can talk about we can shed all those preconceived notions and just talk about the thing itself. What is the absolute? Some of you who have never heard that term are probably like, well, what is the absolute, right? Because this is a lot more this is why I also avoid the word soul. Because if I say the word soul, automatically people think, oh, they picture like light inside their chest maybe, or who knows, right? There's a lot of, just like God, soul brings up a certain connotation, a certain idea behind it. So that's why in the Neogenian system, we use the word zeta. Because you hear that, what the hell is that? What is a zeta? Well, let me tell you, let's define this as a mathematical entity of frequency patterns that exists as a 1 in infinity and a 0 in a triune unity as a perfect mathematical structure that can give rise to all the internal experiences and external world that we exist in through wave interference patterns. Now that's a lot different than if I say soul and people go, what are you talking about? You know, an atheist might be like, that's dumb. What do you mean you believe in the soul? Or someone who's from a religion might think, oh yeah, soul, but have a completely wrong conception of it. So that's why it's important to define these things. And so this is about unraveling the deception of these words. Okay. So this let's actually talk about the archons. I mean, we have talked about the archons, but this is where the text actually talks about the archons. And I'm seeing the time, and this is the important part here. It says, but truth brought names into existence in the world for our sakes because it is not possible to learn it without these names. So words and names exist because they help us, basically. Basically, it's saying that, hey, look, words are deceitful, and people who don't have an understanding are deceived when they hear certain words like God, etc. But they're saying, but words exist because you need them to learn. And that makes sense. Like, I'm using words right now. I can't just vibrate to you. At some point, probably. Well, I mean, I kind of am. That's all that words are, really. They're just vibrational constructs. So I guess in a way, I am just vibrating to you. That's what I'm doing, apparently. But you understand what I'm saying. We can't just, communicate mentally or what. We have to have a form of communication, and this is how we do it. And it's very primitive. Think about how primitive it is. At some point in our evolution, we'll be like, whoa, that was weird. We're just making all these mouth sounds. But we have to do this to be able to communicate. So it says truth is a single thing. It is many things, and for our sakes to teach about this one thing in love through many things. So basically, the truth is one single thing, and the truth is one. Like, we are all one. The truth is a singularity. That's what it is. A reality is a single thing. Now, what does that mean? Now, I can tell you about the Neogenian perspective, and that reality is a singular network mind made up of a multiplicity of Zedic minds that form a Zeta configuration, which is the mental aspect of the absolute, blah, blah, blah. I could say all these words. But notice I'm saying many things to describe a singular thing. And so this is what they're saying. Truth is a single thing, but to teach about this one thing through many things. Now, the rulers, archons, the archons. Remember, archon means rulers. The archons, the rulers, wanted to deceive man, since they saw that he had a kinship with those that are truly good. They took the name of those things that are good and gave it to those that are not good. So they took the names of the things that are good and gave it to the things that are not good. And this is the example with I gave the word God. The word God is something good. But I bet a lot of you out there who have a Christian background and whatnot recoil at the word God. I do. I don't like using it. I have a lot of negative connotations with it. Why? Because it was applied, something good was applied to something not good. In the Gnostics' view, it was applied to the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, the most evil being in creation. To the cathars, it was applied to Satan, Rex Mundi, the king of the world, the archon, the great ruler. And so, in order to deceive, the archons take words that are good, but apply them to things that are not good, so that through the names, they might deceive him and bind them to those that are not good. They're binding. Now, this is so, please don't miss how important this is, because I think some people will be tempted to think, what do you mean? This is dumb. This is so basic. Yeah, you can lie to people. I get it. No, it's a lot more than that. And the power behind this is, I can't emphasize enough. For example, let me give you an example. In fascist regimes, they will often use a name and apply it to individuals or groups that they want people to see as less than human. So they will apply the word or the name, such as like rat or dog. They're rats, they're dogs. What does this what happens now? Now one begins to see these people as something that is less than human, and then atrocities can be committed because it becomes acceptable in those individuals' minds, because they are now seeing that group of people as less than human. And this is evil and despicable and terrible. But this is why it's so important to understand how this is consciously done to manipulate consciousness. This is no accident. This is no, just like, political strategy. I mean, it is a political strategy in some cases, but it comes with, for those who are, truly understanding of how these things work, have the understanding of how to manipulate words and symbols to transform consciousness, because you do the same thing with symbols as well. Certain symbols are positive, certain symbols are negative, and you can apply them and associate them with certain things. You can use certain symbols to inspire people. You can use certain symbols to strike fear into people. You can use certain symbols to unite people. You can use certain symbols to divide people. This is a war of consciousness, a war of the mind, and it's done through names and symbols. And this obviously doesn't mean that all names and symbols are bad. Of course not. It's just a tool like anything else. And it can be used to deceive, or it can be used to enlighten. It can be used to enslave, or it can be used to free. And it says, so they take the names of those things that are good and give it to those that are not good, so that through the names they might deceive and bind them to those things that are not good. It's binding as well. It binds. If you declare something evil as being something, that is God. And if you believe it, if a person believes it, it's binding. This is why spells, right? You can think of these as like, in this case, spells are real if you understand what spells are, as a manipulation of language to manipulate consciousness. Again, I don't like talking about God or soul. I don't like, talking about spells or magic, because the same sort of thing. Like, it comes with all, what are you talking about? Magic, spells, that's crazy. Yeah, as it's typically understood, it's crazy. No one's going to be Harry Potter running around with their wands and summoning demons and levitating and all that bullshit. It's about understanding the power of words and how it changes consciousness. This is so important. This is so key. Please, I beg you, understand how key this is, how powerful this is, how important this is. Because when you know it, you can recognize it and you can break free from it. When you know it, you can recognize it and go, you know what? That's bullshit. I'm not going to fall for that bullshit. I see what you're doing. That way, when someone says, hey, that's God, you don't just go, oh yeah, it's God. You go, hey, I can look at what that thing is and see that it's not God. I can look at its properties. I can understand what it does. I can understand the concept. That is not God. And it applies to so many other things than just God. It applies to political movements, religious movements, systems of thought. That a certain people are good and another certain people are bad, or a certain leader is good and another is bad, or all these different things. I have to be careful. I know just saying good or bad is not very impactful, but I have to be careful with my word choice. Again, YouTube would be like, why are you saying all these things? But you understand, applying these certain powerful words, certain powerful labels, changes and alters consciousness. This is how everything works. This is so incredibly important. So they change the words. They misapply the words. They take the good things, apply them to the bad things, and they bind people to those things because of their manipulation of words. And it says, and afterwards, what a favor they do for them. They make them be removed from those that are not good and place them among those that are good. These things they knew, for they wanted to take the free man and make him a slave to them forever. This is what the archons do. This is what the rulers do. They want to take those who are free and make them slaves forever. It says these are powers, and there's some parts missing from the text here, but let me just read this and then I'll explain it. So the archons are often called rulers. They're sometimes called powers. These are powers which blank, man not wishing him to be saved, in order that may blank. For if man is saved, there will not be any sacrifices, and animals will not be offered to the powers. Indeed, the animals were the ones to whom they sacrificed. they were indeed offering them up alive, but when they offered them up, they died. As for a man, they offered him up to God dead, and he lived. We'll unpack that a bit in a minute, but what I want to emphasize, what this is saying essentially, is that the archons want humanity to remain in a state of enslavement, so they will give them more power. This is what it's saying, that if humanity is saved, if humanity reaches a new state of consciousness, there won't be any sacrifices. Because, in those times it was like, oh, okay, well, I have to sacrifice. If I'm a sinner, I have to sacrifice an animal to God. And in the Bible, it talks about how much God loves sacrifices and how the smell is pleasing to him and how he loves it so much and demands sacrifice all the time and even accepts a burnt virgin sacrifice. And so remember, to the Gnostics, God is an archon. He's the chief archon. And so the archons want humanity to remain in enslavement so that they will give them their power. And that's exactly what humanity does. They give the archons their power. The rulers, those who are manipulating consciousness, are sucking your power away from you, and you are giving it to them. So let's talk about this and how it applies to our world today. Talking about archons basically confusing people, swapping words around, binding them to lies, taking free people and turning them into slaves forever. This is the goal of the archons. Now, if you think about it, that's exactly what's happening today. Okay? So the question is the archons real beings? So this is actually a very complicated question, and we're going to answer it in a minute. Okay? We're going to answer, like, are the archons these actual, like, real spiritual beings? That's what we're going to answer. But before we do that, let's take a look at the archons of our world today. Remember, archon means rulers. The powerful elites, the rich elite, governments, big corporations. I want you to think about this. Remember, words, right? How powerful words are. They're like spells. They bind people. They transform consciousness. Well, think about people who own social networking sites. Think about the power that one has there, where one is in control of the flow of information. And when one is in control of the flow of information, they're in control of consciousness, which is more powerful than any nuclear weapon. This control of consciousness that people are being sucked into because of many different things, but I'm just emphasizing right now, one of the big ones that you can easily see are the rich elite that control social media sites that are literally shaping consciousness in the way that they want. They're masters at twisting the truth. When we think of archons in our world, archon means ruler. Who are the rulers in our world? Who are the archons in our world? The rich elite, governments, big corporations, etc. So they're masters at twisting the truth. They make what's good look bad and what's bad look good. I think you can clearly see that all around us today. All the propaganda. They've completely inverted the world and are using language, symbols, and words as their weapon. So if we take a look at propaganda, people who are master manipulators know how to control the narrative. They use propaganda to shape our beliefs and behaviors. So, for example, take peaceful protests. So let's say that there's a peaceful protest occurring. Someone, let's say that they are standing up for LGBTQ plus rights or women's rights or racial equality or whatever, right? You have a peaceful protest. Well, if they think about how often did they get labeled as rioters or troublemakers. Now, I'm not talking about the times when, sometimes peaceful protests aren't peaceful. That happens sometimes. But I'm talking about protests that are truly peaceful protests will get labeled as rioters and troublemakers, while those in power who are doing despicable and questionable things are portrayed as protectors of the peace. They completely flip and invert in everything. And they completely redefine words to suit their agenda. Think about words like freedom, security, being a patriot. They all get twisted. Think about how some of the people who claim to be on the side of freedom in the world today, what are they doing? They're trying to take people's rights away. That's the opposite of freedom. And you see, that's exactly the archonic tactic of taking a word, as the Gospel of Philip says, something that is good, freedom, and applying it to something that is not good, stripping of a group's rights away. So we end up in situations where giving up our personal freedoms might be seen as necessary for our safety, or because of how this propaganda, this net of lies has been spun. So what they're really doing is they're taking people who would be free-thinking individuals and turning them into obedient followers, slaves, unable to see the truth. You're just bombarded by propaganda all the time. All the time. Everything is propaganda. You're not being fed the truth. You're not being fed what's actually happening. You're being fed what the lies that people want you to believe. And by controlling this narrative and twisting words, they keep us all confused and complacent and submissive. This is how they're able to stay in power without being challenged. And I'll tell you one of the biggest deceptive tactics that are used by the archonic forces in our world. Let's take the rich elite, for example. The rich elite, now there's nothing wrong with having money, but the amount of money that the rich elite have is destroying the world through major wealth inequality. It is ravaging the world, ravaging our planet. All right. So we're not just talking about, someone who makes a lot of money. That's fine. We're talking about the inordinate amount of wealth that the multi-billionaires just hoard and sit on. This is destroying the world. This is I can't emphasize enough how much damage this does to the world. But what have they done? They have spun the narrative in such a way. They are the enslavers, right? They are the enslavers. What have they done? They have spun the narrative so that people admire them and want to be like them. Oh, wow. Aren't they so inspirational? I want to be just like them. And then so people oppose things like taxing the rich because it's like, oh, well, that's not fair, because in their twisted mind, they admire them and think like, oh, well, maybe I'll be like them. You're never going to be a billionaire. You're never going to be a billionaire. Billionaires are not individuals to look up to, unless, there comes along a one who uses it to try and change the world, and that individual would be very much for, they would, whatever gender, would want to be taxed. So, but they've twisted the narrative. And of course, no one's going to rise up against something they worship. So it's like the idea of the demiurge tricking everyone into believing he's God. Well, no one's going to oppose the chief archon if they think he's God. And no one is going to rise up against the rich elite and challenge them and force, laws that would tax them or whatever, if people are admiring them and treating them like gods to be worshipped. So the question is, how, and we are going to get to the question of because we're talking about the archonic forces in our world, such as those in power right now, who are archonic forces. But we're going to answer the question, are archons actual, real, spiritual beings as well? And I know this is going on a bit, so I want to get to this, but the question is, how do we break free from all this? So what do we do to combat this? Well, first, And this is why I'm really trying to emphasize how important this is. So if you're at this point, congratulations. I'm glad that you stuck with me so far. So I'm trying to emphasize, because I think a lot of people will either get bored or they won't. They'll think like, well, they won't really get, they'll think like you're just talking about lying or something simple. No, it is so much more than that. So to enable to combat this, you have to first understand it. You have to understand the game that they're playing. You can't be involved. If you don't know that you're in this game, you can't be involved in it. You have to understand that what's occurring and what's happening, and be able to recognize how language is used to deceive and control us. You need to be able to understand that it is, how to recognize it, and how it's used. So how is this done? Well, this is about understanding how to raise our consciousness, raise our rationality, raise our critical thinking. And when we start questioning and seeking the actual truth, we can break free from this web of lies. So what the Gospel of Philip is talking about is how we need to be vigilant in our spiritual understanding of existence in a world that's filled with lies and deception. So what we exist in right now is a war of consciousness. So you have on one side the archonic forces of the world. What are they trying to do? They are trying to keep humanity in a low state of consciousness. How are they trying to do it? Through words and symbols. What are we trying to do? We're trying to do the exact opposite. We are trying to break free. We're trying to break people free from their mental prisons and raise consciousness. And how can we do this? We can do this through the proper use of words and symbols. That's why when people go like, oh, well, so first of all, when people are like, oh, how do we change the world? Well, first of all, you need to work on yourself. If certain people aren't at a place where they can really go out and make effective change, if they haven't done the work themselves, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone needs to take the time to understand, know thyself, know what they are and where they are. I mean, that can take a while. That can be difficult. You have to understand what existence is, where you are, why you're here. So that's the first part. But once that part is attained, once that part is, it's never completely done, but once you've reached a sufficient level where you're at the level of, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you would be going from self-actualization to transcendence. Self-actualization is about actualizing yourself. Transcendence is then about understanding the divine connection and things, and helping others as well, right? More or less, it's equivalent, more or less, not exactly, but more or less to Maslow's extended hierarchy. So when people go like, well, how do I do it? It's through words and symbols. And that's why I say what you need to do is either use what you are good at or cultivate some kind of skill that will serve as the medium to transmit the information that will serve as a catalyst to raise consciousness. Specifically, what does that mean? It could be anything. It could be music. It could be art. It could be politics. It could be writing books. It could be making videos. Anything that you are good at, using it as a modality to transmit information and act as a catalyst to raise consciousness. People who will hear your music with the particular words that are crafted by you to help break people free from the prison that they are in. Or that book that you write with that certain combination of words that are there to help break people. You can't do it for them, but you can serve as a catalyst. You can serve as a spark. I'm sure all of you who have been on this journey of raising consciousness or spiritual enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, I don't care. But I'm sure that you've had certain things that served as catalysts that started a chain reaction. It's like a domino effect, and things started to fall into place. Then that's what we need to do, is create these catalysts of change, be it books, videos, music, art, movies, games, whatever, all these things crafted in a specific way to liberate humanity and transmit the information that will raise consciousness. Because right now we have all the archonic forces lowering consciousness so that the sacrifices will be continuously given to them. People will continuously give them their power. I'm not being literal about, I know people got to be careful because I know there's conspiracy. I'm not being literal about that, but metaphorically speaking, people giving sacrifices in giving up their power to them. And they are sucking the world dry. They are sucking your soul dry. They are sucking the planet dry. The planet will burn if we don't do something about these people, about these archonic forces that are draining you, draining the world, draining all of us. And this is particularly interesting. So, I mentioned magic. I don't want to talk about magic too much because, it makes people think like, remember, this is about words. And this is why I choose to use certain words and not use certain words. That's why I don't often use words like God or soul or magic or spells, because what's that going to do? It has an effect on consciousness. So someone might hear the word magic and go, oh, that's silly. I'm not going to listen to this because that's dumb. When, you haven't even heard what I think that is or how I define that, etc. So I am very careful about the certain words that I use. Okay, so I just want to point that out there, because we always want to be using words and transmitting information that is helping to raise consciousness. So, but real quick about magic, I just want to talk about something that Aleister Crowley said, because it illustrates this well. Aleister Crowley, in his book, Magic Without Tears, is asked the question, like, what is magic? And he replies, well, magic is about the art and practice of reality conforming to your will, or something, or changing reality according to your will, or something like that. And he talks about the process of writing a book. And he goes, look, when I write a book, I am taking my magical tome, the book. I am taking my pen, the magical weapon. I am, when he writes down, crafting a spell, which is not literally a spell, but the words that he is writing. And I summon spirits to help me disseminate my spell, which is what he gives an example are the spirits like a publisher and an editor, etc., like people. But you see, it's just talking about it in this metaphorical language. So when you see that this is really and the reason why I'm pointing that out, because I know that can be a little distracting. It's like, why are we talking about magic? But I want to give you an example of someone like Crowley who, have to make sure I don't hit my mic, who clearly understood what they were doing. And see, that's the key here. This isn't just about, do you see the way Crowley thought? Like, he didn't look at writing a book as writing a book. He looked at it as crafting a spell to actualize his will. You see the difference between, he knew what he was doing. And yeah, you can have people who, and I'm not saying Crowley lied, but he's a little manipulative sometimes. I don't want to get into that. That's not the point of this. But you have people there's people who just lie, right? Yeah, they're just liars. But then there are people who understand this on a metaphysical level and realize that this is a literal war of the mind, and that it's a different way of looking at existence. You're no longer writing a book, you're creating a spell. Now, I don't talk in terms of like magic or spell work, but we can understand that we are in a system of frequency, and we are literally altering frequency patterns when we communicate through the vibratory complexes or other modalities that we use to transmit information that alters the frequencies of other individuals. And so that's literally what we're doing. And when we consciously realize that and understand that, see, this is in the Neogenian system, what we call will forming, giving form to what we will, understanding that it all begins in the mind and that we have the power to shape reality according to our will through the modes in which we interact with this reality. And when it comes to shifting consciousness, it has to do with the particular words and symbols that are used. And so again, like I said, when people are like, oh, how do we change? Remember, we are in a war of consciousness, a war of the mind right now between these archonic forces, the rulers of this world, the rich elite, etc., who are using tactics and propaganda to alter, manipulate, and confine consciousness. Whereas we need to break that by creating uplifting catalysts that catalyze that spark in individuals to realize their own inner fire so that they can become blazing stars instead of these batteries that are being used. We need to completely change and alter. That's what this world is. It's like a world of batteries. We need to alter that and create a constellation of living stars who have found their light and fire. So I want to answer the question because I know, some people are probably really wondering, like, are archons, because we're talking about archonic forces in terms of, like the rich elite and governments in control, etc. And just to be clear, I'm not like against all government. I'm against, the improper use and bad governments. But what I'm talking about here. Okay, so are archons actual, like, other than that though, are they real spiritual beings? So I will say, like, archons as literally described in these gospels don't actually exist, right? There's no Yaldabaoth, there's no chief archon who literally created the material world, who literally created human bodies, who not like that, right? Not like that. Archons are real in terms of, like I said, the rulers of this world, but it is possible that so clearly there are higher levels of reality than this one. And in the Neogenian system, this is what we call CFDs, or collective frequency domains. These are collective domains created by a collective of zetas, a zeta network, a zeta configuration that has evolved to a certain level where they are highly evolved. They no longer require the material realm. They've synchronized such that they can project their own dimension or internal reality or CFD projection, in which they no longer exist in this realm. They exist in their own domain. For ease of explanation, you can think of it like an alternate dimension. It's not exactly like that, but kind of like that. So there are higher beings, and I believe, based on what I've researched and what I know and logical reasoning from first principles and extrapolating from that, that it's very likely that these beings are interested in our evolution. So it is possible that there could be nefarious minds that have ill intentions for humanity, that are subtly working behind the scenes to move humanity to a certain frequency that is compatible with their network. So that's the idea here, is that there are network minds that are likely interested in humanity to get humanity on their frequency, so to speak, so that they are compatible and can become part of their network. So it is possible that they interact with reality in a certain way. And so how do they do this? How do they interact with reality? Well, again, like, this is not something that we can say with 100% certainty, but it's likely that they are able to possibly influence things in the unconscious domain. From the realm of mind in the unconscious, they can perhaps subtly shift people to certain ways of thinking or certain ways of behaving. Another possibility is that particular Zetic nodes from their network or souls may choose to localize or incarnate into a human body in order to shift things towards their interests. Now, of course, if a soul or Zeta localizes into an avatar, the filtering mechanism of the brain is going to make them forget what they are, where they are, and why they're here. All that's going to be forgotten. But if they are a powerful mind, all that resides in the unconscious. So even if they don't explicitly explicitly know that, they still could be, because of that unconscious drive, work towards shifting the world to that frequency without knowing, explicitly that they are from a negative network, or like what we would call a slave framework, and try and shift reality to that. Because that's the whole point, is that to enslave humanity, you just shift them to your frequency, because then they're accepting of it. They accept it and they become integrated into it because they accept that. I'm sure that there will be ones that don't accept it, but they will just be coerced into it. But I don't want that to become too much of a distraction, okay? Because it's interesting to think about. So archons, as literally described, no, there's no Yaldabaoth. There's no, they're not literally creating the world, literally doing these things. Higher minds that have an influence in humanity that could be possibly shifting reality towards shifting humanity toward or influencing humanity towards the way that they want. Possibly. And that's very interesting to think about. And I get into this in detail in some of my books. And it's a very interesting thing to think about, but it's important not to get too distracted, because now we're getting distracted because we're spending all this time thinking about, oh, what are these things like? And then people like get into conspiracy theories. Oh, maybe there's shapeshifters and blah, blah, blah. And as long as you're focused on shape-shifting reptiles or interdimensional beings, you're going to lose sight of the forces that are destroying the world, like the rich elite. Like the rich elite and those in power would love for you to just be, trying to, psychically annihilate the reptilians from Dimension 24 rather than taxing the shit out of them. Right? You see what I'm saying? So I just want to make it clear, while it's interesting to think about, and I believe that it's very possible, again, not in the way as described here, but in a different way, like how I laid it out. It's important not to get distracted by that and realize that we are in a war of the mind, because getting distracted like that is another manipulation tactic by people who, you get so distracted, you don't know who the enemy is. You don't realize that the enemy is right in front of you because you've labeled it as something to admire, and you're, busy fighting the moon men in the hollow moon base, and then the world burns because no one's united and no one's moving towards, higher consciousness is not about believing in hollow moons and stuff like that. Has nothing to do with it. What it's about is realizing how existence works, what you are, where you are, why you are here, and using your power that you unlock when you realize this to change and transform the world. That is what we are doing. As Neogenians, we are arbiters of the new beginning. We are catalysts for the new earth. That's what we are here to do right here and right now. And it's not something that you're watching. It's something that you are a part of. I'm a part of it. You're a part of it. You're watching this video right now. You are a part of this right here and now. So this video has gone on for quite a while, but see what I meant? Like, there's a lot to talk about here, and it all connects together. And really important information, really powerful information. We are going to continue to read the Gospel of Philip, by the way. There's a lot of interesting stuff. We're just getting started with the Gospel of Philip. Check out my other videos. Check out my book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. And check out my podcast, Dawn of the New Earth. Go check it out. Support my work if you'd like on patreon.com/MorgueOfficial, or become a member here on YouTube. We have a Discord server. We have private chats where, it's really great. And you will also get access to members only videos. A lot of great stuff. Check it out. All right, my friends, thank you so much. Big shout out to everyone who supports, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Nusalina, Eric, Christopher, Joel, Phillips, Luke, Thomas, Ryan, Eon, and everyone else. Thank you very much.